What happens when trust is broken? When those supposed to protect us become the perpetrators? This isn't a hypothetical question, but the chilling reality of a case that shook the quiet calm of South Dakota. A tale that involves an elderly Texas couple, Richard and Susan Spry, and a grand theft that reached well over $500,000. Richard, at the ripe age of 82, and Susan, a sprightly 75, were not your typical suspects. They were trusted, they were respected, they were, for all intents and purposes, just another elderly couple navigating their twilight years. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, a sinister plot was brewing. The Sprys were convicted of 6 charges connected to a grand theft. But this wasn't a simple snatch and grab, it was a meticulously orchestrated exploitation, a betrayal of trust that spanned from bank accounts to vehicles. The victims? An adult who was either elderly or had a disability. The amount stolen? Anywhere between $100,000 to over $500,000. A staggering sum that belies the depth of their deception. The trust that was once placed in the Sprys was shattered, replaced with a stark realization of their true colors. The elderly couple had turned from protectors to predators, their actions leaving a trail of broken trust and financial ruin. But justice, as they say, is blind. It doesn't discriminate between the young or the old, the rich or the poor. And so, the Sprys found themselves facing a slew of charges, their actions finally catching up with them. Richard, with 2 felony counts of grand theft, and 1 of conspiracy to commit grand theft. Susan, with similar counts of grand theft and conspiracy, along with a misdemeanor count of theft by exploitation. Stay tuned as we unravel this tale of betrayal and deceit. The story of the Sprys is a potent reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that trust, once broken, can have far-reaching consequences. As we delve deeper into this case, we'll uncover the depth of their deception, the gravity of their actions, and the justice that awaited them at the end of their deceitful path. In the heart of Texas, a sinister plot was brewing. It was a scheme so audacious, so outrageous, that it's almost hard to believe. Richard and Susan Spry, an elderly couple, were preparing to commit a crime that would shock their community and beyond. They had set their sights on an individual who by all accounts should have been safe from such a malicious act. This person was not just any adult. They were either elderly or had a disability, making them particularly vulnerable. The Sprys saw this not as a call to compassion but as an opportunity for exploitation, a chance to line their pockets at the expense of someone else's security and well-being. Their methods were as ruthless as they were cunning. This wasn't a one-off act of theft, it was a systematic and calculated plundering of this individual's wealth. They dipped their hands into bank accounts, siphoning off funds with an audacity that was as brazen as it was unlawful. And it wasn't only money that they stole, vehicles too were part of their ill-gotten gains. These were not petty thieves, content with small pickings. The Sprys were aiming high. The total value of the money and property they stole ranged from a staggering $100,000 to an eye-watering $500,000. It's easy to imagine the sheer audacity of their actions. The meticulous planning, the cold-hearted execution of their plan, the utter disregard for the person they were robbing of not just their wealth, but their security and peace of mind. But, as is often the case with such grand schemes, their greed was their downfall. Their actions did not go unnoticed. The sheer scale of their thefts, the audacity of their crimes, began to raise alarm bells. And soon, the law would come knocking at their door. But like most acts of deception, their crime didn't go unnoticed. As the victims' bank accounts dwindled, suspicions arose. And so began the meticulous investigation into the Sprys, an elderly Texas couple who, beneath the veneer of their seemingly ordinary life, hid an appalling secret. The key to the investigation was evidence, and it wasn't long before it started to pile up against the Sprys. The victims, all of them elderly or with disabilities, had their bank accounts mysteriously drained, their property vanished, and their trust shattered. The question was, how did the Sprys manage to pull off such an audacious theft? The answer lay in a web of deceit and manipulation, spun so intricately that it took an entire team of dedicated investigators to unravel it. The Sprys, it turned out, had exploited their victims' vulnerabilities, gaining their trust only to betray them in the most heinous way possible. They didn't act alone, though. There were others involved in the conspiracy, their roles yet to be fully uncovered. But the focus of the investigation remained on the Sprys, the masterminds of the scheme. Throughout the investigation, South Dakota Attorney General Mary Jackley played a pivotal role. Her relentless pursuit of the truth, backed by a team of tireless prosecutors, ensured that no stone was left unturned, no lead unexplored. Her commitment to justice was unwavering, a beacon of hope for the victims who had been left devastated by the Sprys' actions. With each passing day, the evidence against the Sprys became more compelling. Bank records, witness testimonies, and forensic analysis all painted an incriminating picture of the Sprys' criminal activities. The evidence was not just substantial, it was overwhelming. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, the Sprys maintained their innocence. They refused to admit any wrongdoing, even as the walls of their deceitful world began to crumble around them. But the truth, as they say, has a way of coming out. The Sprys' days of freedom were numbered, and the victims, who had been waiting patiently for justice, were about to see the scales tipped in their favor. The evidence was undeniable, and justice was about to be served. The Sprys' reign of deception was coming to an end, and the stage was set for their long-awaited day in court. The victims, who had endured so much, could finally see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The gavel fell, echoing the verdict in the courtroom. A sound that marked the end of a long journey for justice and the beginning of a new chapter for the Sprys. Richard Spry, an 82-year-old man, was found guilty of 2 felony counts of grand theft and 1 felony count of conspiracy to commit grand theft. The jury, after hearing all the evidence, had no doubt in their minds that he was responsible for the crimes he was accused of. But it wasn't just Richard who was in the spotlight. His partner in crime, Susan Spry, a 75-year-old woman, was also standing before the jury, awaiting her fate. She too was convicted of felony counts of grand theft and 1 felony count of conspiracy to commit grand theft. This elderly Texas couple together had orchestrated a scheme that had robbed an adult who was elderly or had a disability of their hard-earned money and property. The thefts ranged from $100,000 to $500,000, an amount that is hard to fathom for most of us. It included money from bank accounts and vehicles. The audacity of their actions was shocking, to say the least. But their conviction proved that no one is above the law, not even a seemingly innocent elderly couple. Yet Susan's conviction didn't stop at the felony counts. She was also found guilty of 1 misdemeanor count of theft by exploitation. This meant that she had taken advantage of a person who was in a vulnerable position, either due to their age or their disability. This added another layer to the depth of their deceit and the level of their manipulation. The couple's conviction was not just a victory for the victim but for the justice system as a whole. It served as a reminder that justice, although sometimes delayed, is never denied. It was a clear message to those who might consider exploiting the vulnerable, thinking they can get away with it. It was a testament to the fact that every action has consequences. And for the Sprys, these consequences were just beginning to unfold. But what would this mean for the Sprys? The gavel had fallen, but their fate was far from sealed. The sentencing was yet to come, and with it, the final judgment. The Sprys had been convicted, but now they had to face the music. What would be the price of their deception? Only time would tell. Justice at last was on the horizon. The day of reckoning was set for July 9th, a date etched into the minds of all those involved. The Sprys, Richard and Susan, would finally face the consequences of their actions. Richard Spry, at 82 years old, was looking at a potential maximum combined sentence of 27 years. A daunting prospect for anyone, let alone a man of his advanced age. His wife, Susan Spry, 75 years old, was not far behind. She was staring down a potential maximum combined sentence of 26 years. It's worth noting that these are not just numbers on paper. These are years, potentially spent behind bars, years of freedom lost as payment for their crimes. Years that would be spent reflecting on the thefts that ranged from $100,000 to $500,000, including money from bank accounts and vehicles. But as we all know, justice can sometimes be a slow and winding road. As of now, both Richard and Susan Spry are out, released on bond. They are free, but with the weight of their impending sentencing hanging over them. Free, but for how long, one may ask. That is a question only July 9th can answer. As we await the sentencing, we are reminded of the devastating consequences of broken trust. The Sprys, once respected members of their community, will now forever be remembered for their deception and greed. Whether they spend the next 2 decades behind bars or not, their legacy is irrevocably tarnished. We are left to hope that justice will be served, and that their story serves as a stark reminder of the damage that can be done when trust is exploited for personal gain. As we look back at this case, we are left with some unsettling questions. Questions that shake us to our core, that challenge our sense of trust, and that force us to confront the harsh realities of the world we live in. Trust is a cornerstone of our society. It's the foundation on which our relationships are built, the glue that holds our communities together. But what happens when that trust is shattered? When the people we are supposed to rely on to protect us betray us in the most devastating way possible? The case of Richard and Susan Sprys is a chilling example of this betrayal. This elderly Texas couple, who were entrusted with the care and protection of a vulnerable adult, exploited that trust for their own gain. They stole not just money and property but also the sense of security and peace that every individual deserves. This case serves as a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance. It underscores the need for us to be aware, to question, to scrutinize, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because the pursuit of justice is not just about holding wrongdoers accountable, it's also about preventing such heinous acts from happening in the first place. It's about creating a society where the vulnerable are protected, where trust is honored, and where crimes like these are the exception, not the rule. It's about standing up for what is right and ensuring that those who exploit the trust of others are brought to justice. So, let's take this case as a lesson. Let's remember the victims, the betrayed, the exploited. Let's remind ourselves of the importance of trust and the devastating consequences when that trust is broken. And let's reaffirm our commitment to justice, to a society where everyone is protected and where everyone is held accountable for their actions. In the end, it's a stark reminder that even in the most unlikely places, crime can and does happen. And